He thought the waitress was an illiterate country girl until she changed his life in seconds. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a chilly Thursday evening in a small town in the countryside. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a pace that felt like it had been frozen in time. It was also where Jeremy Wilson, a powerful CEO from New York City, found himself in a humble little diner called Rosie's Cafe. Jeremy wasn't here by choice. He had been driving from a business meeting in a nearby town when his luxury car broke down in the middle of nowhere. With no other option, he ended up at Rosie's Cafe to wait for a tow truck. Rosie's was the kind of diner that had been around for decades. The walls were adorned with old photos of the town, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. The place had character, but it was far from the polished, upscale restaurants Jeremy was used to in the city. As he walked in, he couldn't help but wrinkle his nose. It wasn't the type of place a billionaire like him should be spending his time in. He took a seat at one of the booths, pulled out his phone, and began scrolling through emails. After a few moments, a young woman approached his table. She was dressed in a simple black apron, her brown hair tied back in a ponytail. She looked about 20-something, with soft eyes and a faint smile, but there was something about her that caught Jeremy's attention. It wasn't just her appearance. There was a certain confidence in the way she moved, a quiet strength that made him pause for a moment. She introduced herself in a calm, polite manner, asking what he would like to order. He gave her a cursory glance, expecting her to be like every other waitress he had ever encountered, polite, but unremarkable. But then, he decided to have a little fun. "You look like you might not know much about fine dining," he said with a smirk, "but let's see if you can handle a little challenge. If you can tell me the price of this wine, I'll give you a tip that'll make your day." The young woman smiled politely, but she didn't flinch. "It's $45, sir," she replied without hesitation. "It's a 2017 Bordeaux." Jeremy's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Most waitresses would have hesitated, but she knew the answer instantly. He chuckled, intrigued but still skeptical. "All right, let's see if you can keep up," he thought to himself. As he perused the menu, he continued to throw out little tests, hoping to catch her off guard. He asked about the origins of different dishes, about the source of the beef, about obscure wine regions, and to his surprise, she answered each question confidently and knowledgeably. He was starting to feel a little uncomfortable. Who was this woman? She wasn't just a small-town waitress. There was something more to her. But he wasn't ready to admit that just yet. He had more tricks up his sleeve. "So, tell me," he said, leaning back in his seat. "What's a girl like you doing working in a place like this?" She paused for a moment, a slight flicker of hesitation in her eyes, but then she answered, "I'm here because it pays the bills. But I used to work in finance. I left that life behind." Jeremy blinked, unsure of what he had just heard. Finance. What kind of person with a finance background ends up in a diner like this? His curiosity was piqued, and for the first time, he actually looked at her. She wasn't just any waitress. She was something else entirely. As he continued to ask questions, he realized that she wasn't just knowledgeable about food and wine. She knew business, too. There was no way she could have learned all of this by working in a diner. He could see it in the way she spoke, the way she responded with ease and confidence. And that's when it hit him. He had underestimated her, just like he had underestimated so many people before. He had thought she was nothing more than an illiterate country girl. But now, he wasn't so sure. She had changed the way he saw things, and he wasn't ready to admit that just yet. "You've impressed me," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. But little did he know, this was only the beginning of the surprise she had in store for him. As the evening went on, Jeremy found himself increasingly captivated by the young waitress. She wasn't just any waitress. She was intelligent, confident, and had an air of quiet mystery about her that made it hard to look away. His initial assumptions had been wrong, so wrong in fact that he almost couldn't believe it. The more he spoke with her, the more he realized how much he had underestimated her. As he sat there, the food in front of him forgotten, he continued to ask her questions, trying to figure out where this all came from. You mentioned you used to work in finance. What made you leave? He asked, genuinely curious now. Christina, still with that calm demeanor, didn't hesitate. I left because I didn't want to be part of a world that valued money over people. Her answer hit him harder than he expected. Jeremy, who had spent his entire life chasing wealth and power, found himself speechless for a moment. The very world he had built his empire on, the world he believed was the only one worth striving for, was something she had walked away from. It was an idea that he had never even considered. That's incredible, he managed to say, still trying to wrap his head around it. But she just shrugged, not letting the moment linger. It's just a choice I made, she said, as if it were no big deal. But Jeremy couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. He had spent years honing his instincts, training himself to read people, but she was different. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. He wasn't used to feeling out of his depth, but she was making him feel just that. As the evening wore on, the two continued to converse, the line between customer and waitress becoming more blurred. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone with real substance, someone who had her own story, her own journey that didn't need his validation. He was the one in the hot seat now. As they continued talking, Jeremy felt his perception of her begin to shift. No longer was she just a simple woman from a small town. She was someone who had depth, intelligence, and an understanding of the world that he couldn't ignore. You know, Jeremy said, leaning in slightly, most people would have told me what I wanted to hear. But you just tell it like it is. Christina met his gaze, her expression unreadable. There's no point in pretending to be something you're not. People can see through it, she said simply. And why would you want to live a life of pretending? Jeremy didn't know how to answer. There was a part of him that admired her honesty, even as it made him uncomfortable. He had spent so long pretending, so long living behind the facade of success and wealth that the idea of just being real with people was foreign to him. The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but Jeremy couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. As she walked away to check on another table, he found himself staring after her, still trying to process everything. The world he had worked so hard to build suddenly felt hollow. But Christina, she had it all figured out. She was comfortable with herself, with who she was, and that was something he couldn't say for himself. He wasn't used to feeling like this, vulnerable, uncertain. But he also couldn't ignore the fact that she had made him question everything. By the time Christina came back to his table to deliver the check, Jeremy had made a decision. He had to know more about her. I think we need to continue this conversation, he said, his voice a little more serious than he intended. You're not just a waitress, he added, and for the first time, his words weren't an insult or a dismissive comment. You're something more. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze calm and steady. Maybe, she said, but I'm not sure it's something you'll be able to understand. Her words stung, but in a way, they also made sense. She wasn't interested in impressing him or anyone else, and that was something that Jeremy didn't know how to deal with. People always wanted something from him, but she didn't need anything from him. As she turned to leave, Jeremy watched her, realizing how much he wanted to understand her, to figure out what made her tick. He had no idea just how much his life was about to change, and just how much of that change would come from the very woman he had dismissed so easily at the beginning of the evening. Jeremy couldn't stop thinking about Christina. The more he reflected on their conversation, the more he realized how much he had misjudged her. It wasn't just her intelligence that intrigued him. It was her complete lack of desire for the things he had worked his entire life to acquire. Money, power, status, none of it seemed to matter to her. For the first time, Jeremy began to question the life he had built for himself. As he sat in his sleek, high-rise office the next day, staring out at the city skyline, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His business was thriving, his wealth was growing, and yet he felt empty. He had built everything he ever wanted, but in the process, he had lost sight of the things that really mattered. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. Mr. Wilson, you have a meeting scheduled with the investors from overseas in 15 minutes, his assistant reminded him. I'll be there in a moment, he said absently, still distracted. The investors would be fine. He needed to focus on something else. Something bigger. Something real. That afternoon, Jeremy made a decision. He would go back to Rosie's cafe. He had to see Christina again. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just curiosity, Or maybe it was because he needed someone who wasn't interested in his money or his power. He needed to meet her on her own terms. When he arrived at the diner, he found it exactly as it had been the night before, warm, inviting, with the hum of low conversations and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. As he walked in, the familiar faces of the staff greeted him, and he spotted Christina in the back, wiping down a table. She looked up, her expression unreadable, but there was a hint of surprise in her eyes when she saw him. "Mr. Wilson," she said calmly, setting the rag down on the counter. "What brings you here?" Jeremy hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach her. "I wanted to talk," he said simply. "About what?" Christina asked, her tone neutral but not unkind. "About yesterday," he replied, his voice quiet. I didn't expect you to be so different." She raised an eyebrow but didn't speak, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent my whole life chasing success, chasing power," he admitted, "and I thought I had everything figured out. But then I met you, and you made me question everything." Christina studied him for a moment, her gaze steady, before she spoke. "You think you can just walk in here and change everything? That you can just come here, talk to me for a few minutes, and suddenly your life will be different?" She paused, folding her arms across her chest. "You've got to figure it out on your own, Mr. Wilson." Her words stung, but they were also true. Jeremy had been living in a bubble for so long, surrounded by people who only saw him for what he had, not for who he was. He had never really had to face himself until now. He was used to being the one in control, the one who called the shots, but now, he felt vulnerable. "I know I've got a lot to figure out," he said quietly, "and I don't expect you to have the answers. But I need to understand why I feel like this. Why everything I've worked for suddenly seems so empty." Christina's expression softened, just slightly. "Maybe it's because you've been living for the wrong reasons," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Maybe it's because you've been chasing things that don't matter, and now you're realizing that. Maybe it's time to stop pretending to be someone you're not." Jeremy swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. He had never really thought about it that way before. "And what if I don't know who I really am?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Then you need to find out," Christina replied. "But you won't find the answer in the things you've built. You won't find it in your office, or your car, or your bank account. You have to find it in yourself." Jeremy stood there for a long moment, taking in her words. It was like a light bulb had gone off in his mind. She was right. All the things he had accumulated over the years, none of them had brought him true happiness. And as much as he hated to admit it, he was scared. Scared to face the truth about himself. But he also knew that she was right. He had to change. It wouldn't happen overnight, and it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in years, Jeremy felt like he was on the right path. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Christina asked, her tone a little softer now. "For making me see things differently," he replied. "For making me realize that there's more to life than just success." Christina gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I didn't do anything," she said, turning back to clean the table. "You did it all yourself." Jeremy watched her for a moment, then turned to leave. As he stepped out of the diner and into the cool evening air, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, he wasn't chasing something. He was simply living. And that, he realized, was all that mattered. Jeremy spent the next few weeks in a haze of contemplation. What Christina had said that day had echoed in his mind long after he had left Rosie's cafe. For the first time in his life, he was questioning everything. The fast-paced world he had built, with all its power, wealth, and status, suddenly felt shallow. He had spent so many years chasing success that he had never stopped to ask himself what truly mattered. He had never stopped to ask what kind of person he wanted to be. His company was thriving, his financial portfolio was as strong as ever, but none of it brought him the fulfillment he was searching for. The ache inside him was growing, and the only person who seemed to offer him even a glimpse of peace was Christina. She had shaken him to his core with nothing but a few words. A few words from someone who didn't care about his wealth or his influence, but who cared about something far more important, being true to oneself. Jeremy found himself returning to Rosie's cafe more often than he had intended, but each time, he found something new, something deeper that he hadn't seen before. Christina was always there, going about her work with the same quiet grace. She didn't change. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't Need to. That was the part that intrigued him the most. She had everything he had spent his life trying to acquire: self-respect, authenticity, a sense of purpose. And yet, she didn't even seem to care about the things he thought were important. She had a peace about her that he couldn't quite understand, but it was the peace he had been searching for. Jeremy found himself spending more time at the cafe, not just for the company, but because it felt like the only place where he could breathe. One afternoon, he showed up, sitting at his usual booth, his thoughts swirling. Christina noticed him immediately. She didn't rush to greet him, but she didn't ignore him either. She simply walked over and set a glass of water in front of him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet acknowledgement. "How's the world treating you today, Mr. Wilson?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "Better," Jeremy replied, his eyes meeting hers with a kind of sincerity that was rare for him. "Much better, actually." Christina gave him a small smile, one that seemed to say she knew exactly what he meant, but she didn't press. She gave him space. "If you need anything, just let me know," she said before walking away. As the days passed, Jeremy began to realize that what he was searching for wasn't something that could be bought or acquired through business deals. It wasn't something that could be achieved by climbing to the top of the corporate ladder or accumulating more wealth. It was something deeper. It was about being true to himself, about finding peace in the world as it was, rather than constantly chasing something that was always out of reach. He began to let go of his need for control. He started taking time for himself, for the first time in years. He spent afternoons at the cafe, reading, reflecting, and even talking with Christina when she had a free moment. He found himself listening more, not just to her, but to the world around him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't chasing the next big deal or trying to impress the next potential investor. He was simply living. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jeremy sat at the window of the cafe, watching the world outside. He had stopped checking his phone every few minutes. He had stopped feeling the constant pressure to stay ahead. He was finally at peace. Christina came over to his table with a cup of coffee. "You seem different," she said, her eyes studying him. "Better," he replied, his smile genuine. "Much better." She set the coffee down in front of him, her expression softening. "I'm glad to hear it," she said. "Sometimes, we all just need to slow down and realize that we have everything we need right here." Jeremy met her gaze, and for the first time, he truly understood what she meant. It wasn't about the things he had. It wasn't about the power or the money or the accolades. It was about finding contentment in who he was and where he was in life. For the first time, he was truly living. "Thank you, Christina," he said quietly, "for making me see that." She smiled, but it was a small, knowing smile. "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "You did it all yourself." Jeremy sat there for a long moment, savoring the warmth of the coffee and the newfound peace that filled him. He had spent so much of his life chasing after the wrong things, but now, he felt like he was finally on the right path. And it had all started with a simple waitress, a conversation, and the realization that sometimes the greatest treasures in life are the ones we already have. Jeremy's transformation over the past few weeks had been nothing short of extraordinary. As he continued to frequent Rosie's cafe, he found himself settling into a life he hadn't realized he was missing. The pressures of his empire no longer consumed him as they once had. He had stopped chasing the next big deal, the next acquisition. He had begun to understand that what truly mattered wasn't how much wealth or power he had, but the relationships he built, the impact he made, and the peace he felt within himself. Christina, in her quiet way, had opened his eyes to a world he had never fully appreciated. Each time he saw her, he felt a renewed sense of clarity. The more he spoke with her, the more he realized that she wasn't just a reflection of the life he had walked away from. She was also a window into a life he could still create. For himself. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the last customers trickled out, Jeremy stayed behind, as he often did now. He was alone at his usual booth, looking over his notes for a new project he was working on. Something that wasn't about profits, but about giving back to the community that had supported Rosie's cafe and places like it. It was a new kind of project, one that focused on local businesses and sustainability, things he had never truly paid attention to before. Christina came over to refill his coffee, and their conversation turned to the future. "You seem different lately," she remarked, her soft smile never wavering. I've been thinking a lot about change, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. It's not just about success anymore. It's about making a difference in a way that matters. Christina raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. What kind of difference? I want to create opportunities for people who are doing real work, not just chasing the next big thing, he explained. Like you and Rosie's Cafe. I want to help more businesses like this, ones that are built on real value, not just profits. Christina nodded thoughtfully. That's a good start, she said quietly. But don't forget that the people you're helping need to see more than just money. They need to feel like what they're doing matters. Her words stuck with him long after she had left him alone again to work. He realized she was right. The most important thing wasn't just about providing financial support. It was about helping people feel valued, about showing them that their efforts, no matter how small, made a real difference. Over the next few months, Jeremy poured himself into this new vision, using his resources to help fund local businesses and support communities in need. He began organizing events to bring attention to small businesses like Rosie's Cafe, businesses that valued people over profit. It was a slow process, but Jeremy felt more fulfilled than he had in years. One afternoon, as he was walking through the streets of Manhattan to attend a meeting about his new project, he was stopped by a familiar voice. Mr. Wilson. Jeremy turned to see Rosie standing in front of him with a bright smile on her face. I wanted to thank you, she said, for everything you've done. We've seen a big change around here, and it's all because of your support. Jeremy smiled back, a deep sense of satisfaction welling up inside him. It's been my pleasure, he said. I'm just glad to be a part of something that really matters. As the conversation ended, Jeremy couldn't help but think back to the moment when he had first come to Rosie's Cafe, thinking he had everything figured out. He had been so sure of himself then, so confident in his power and wealth. But it had taken Christina, of all people, to show him that there was so much more to life than the things he had spent his entire career building. Now, he knew that the real value in life came from the connections we made, the people we helped, and the lives we touched in ways that went beyond money and status. That afternoon, as he watched the sun set over the skyline, Jeremy realized that he had found something even more important than success. He had found purpose. And it all started with a waitress in a small cafe who had unknowingly changed his life forever. Months passed, and Jeremy's life had taken on a new rhythm. He found himself in a place he never thought he would be, helping others, giving back to the community, and feeling a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. The company he had built was still growing, but now, it wasn't just about the profits. He was focused on something bigger, on making a real difference. The changes he had made in his life were starting to ripple out, touching not only the lives of the people he worked with, but also the lives of those around him. He had become more involved in the day-to-day operations of his new project, focusing on supporting small businesses like Rosie's Cafe, businesses that valued people over profit. It wasn't easy, but it was rewarding. Christina, as always, was there, watching quietly as Jeremy worked to transform the world around him. Her presence was a constant reminder that the simple things mattered the most. One day, as Jeremy sat at his desk in his office, going through reports on the latest project, he received a call that would change everything. It was Rosie, and she sounded a little out of breath. Jeremy, you need to come to the cafe right now. There's something happening. The urgency in her voice sent a wave of panic through him. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and rushed out of the office, heading straight for Rosie's Cafe. When he arrived, he saw Rosie standing in front of the cafe, her face pale. What's going on? He asked, his heart racing. Rosie looked at him, her expression a mixture of worry and confusion. It's Christina. She hasn't shown up for work, and I can't get a hold of her. I'm worried. Jeremy's stomach dropped. Christina had always been reliable, always showed up on time, and had never once given Rosie any reason to worry. Have you tried calling her again? He asked. Rosie nodded. I've tried everything. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. Jeremy felt a pang of fear in his chest. He didn't know why, but he had this gut feeling that something wasn't right. Without wasting any more time, he went straight to Christina's apartment, hoping against hope that it was just a misunderstanding. When he knocked on her door, there was no answer. His heart raced as he tried the door handle. It was unlocked. He stepped inside, calling out her name. The apartment was quiet, eerily so, and the unease in Jeremy's stomach grew stronger. Christina, He called again, his voice tight with worry. He walked further into the apartment, his eyes scanning the room. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. There, on the kitchen table, was a note. He quickly walked over and read the note aloud. Jeremy, I've gone away for a while to think things through. Please don't worry. I just need some space. I'll be back soon. Christina. Jeremy exhaled, a mixture of relief and confusion flooding over him. He couldn't understand why Christina would leave without saying anything to him. Had something happened? Was she upset with him? He didn't know, but he knew he had to find her. He couldn't let her go without understanding why she had disappeared. Over the next few days, Jeremy tried everything he could to find her. He contacted every person he knew who might have any information about where she was. He even reached out to the few people who had worked with her at her previous job in finance, hoping for a lead. But nothing came up. It was like Christina had vanished into thin air. The uncertainty ate at him. The longer she stayed away, the more worried he became. What if something had happened to her? What if she was in danger? Finally, after nearly a week of searching with no leads, Jeremy found himself standing outside her childhood home in a small town hours away from the city. Rosie had mentioned it to him in passing, and something told him he needed to go there. He had no idea what he would find, but he had to try. The house was small, tucked away on a quiet street. It was exactly the kind of place Jeremy had never paid attention to in the past. He knocked on the door, his heart beating fast in his chest. After a long pause, the door opened, and an older woman, her hair graying and her eyes tired but warm, greeted him. Can I help you? She asked, her voice soft. I'm looking for Christina, Jeremy said, his voice tight. She's not here, the woman replied, a hint of sadness in her eyes. She left a few days ago. I don't know where she went. Jeremy felt a sinking feeling in his chest. Do you know why she left? He asked. The woman looked at him for a moment, then nodded. She's been struggling with something for a while. She didn't want to burden anyone, so she left to sort things out on her own. The words hit Jeremy like a punch to the gut. What kind of struggle? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman sighed, her eyes distant. She's been carrying a lot on her shoulders for years, Jeremy. She's always been strong, but even the strongest people need help sometimes. Jeremy stood there in silence, taking in the woman's words. He realized that Christina had been dealing with things he never could have imagined, things she had never shared with him. He felt a deep sense of guilt wash over him. He had been so focused on his own transformation, on his own path to redemption, that he hadn't seen what Christina was going through. He hadn't been there for her the way she had been there for him. With a deep breath, Jeremy knew he couldn't let her face this alone. He would find her. He would help her the way she had helped him. And he would prove to her that she wasn't alone anymore. Jeremy spent the following days combing through every lead he could find. He felt a constant knot in his stomach, an unease that he couldn't shake. Despite his newfound peace, the thought of Christina being out there alone, dealing with her own struggles, gnawed at him. The deeper he dug into her past, the more he realized that he hadn't truly known her. Not completely. He had seen her as a quiet, confident woman, someone who had everything figured out, but that was only a surface-level understanding. He had never asked her about her life before the cafe, before he had entered her world. He had never truly asked what drove her, what kept her up at night. And now, as he stood outside the small house, her childhood home, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt. He had thought he was the one going through a transformation, but in reality, he had been blind to the fact that Christina was going through her own personal battles. The woman who had shown him what it meant to live authentically, to give without expecting anything in return, had been struggling with her own demons all along. He had focused so much on his own redemption that he hadn't even realized she was in need of help. As Jeremy sat with Christina's mother, talking about her daughter, he learned more than he had ever expected. Christina had left the finance world to take care of her family, to support her mother, who had fallen ill a few years back. She had left a promising career to take on the responsibility of caring for her family, and in doing so, she had buried her own dreams. The weight of those sacrifices had taken a toll on her, but she had never let anyone see it. She had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. But now, her strength had been stretched thin, and she had retreated, trying to find a way to heal on her own. The more Jeremy learned, the more he realized how much he had taken Christina's resilience for granted. She had been the one to teach him the most valuable lessons, but he hadn't seen how much she had given up to teach him. He hadn't seen the sacrifices she had made for her family, for the people around her. She hadn't asked for recognition, and she certainly hadn't asked for help. But now, as he sat in her childhood home, he knew that he couldn't let her face her struggles alone any longer. Jeremy knew he had to find her, to let her know that he was there for her, just as she had been there for him. It wasn't enough to simply feel guilty. He had to act. With renewed determination, Jeremy left the house and drove back to the city. He had made up his mind. He was going to help Christina, not because he felt sorry for her, but because she deserved it. She deserved to know that she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. Over the next few days, he did everything he could to track her down. He reached out to everyone who might know where she had gone, scouring every possible avenue. He didn't care how long it took. He would find her. It wasn't about making things right with her. It was about being there for her when she needed it the most. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jeremy received a call that would change everything. It was from one of the people Christina had worked with in the past. She had been spotted at a small retreat center in the mountains, a place where people went to disconnect and heal. It was the first solid lead Jeremy had gotten in days, and he didn't hesitate. He packed his bags, booked a flight, and made his way to the retreat center. As he arrived, the air was crisp and fresh, the mountains towering above him in a way that made him feel small, yet peaceful. It was the perfect place for someone like Christina to get away and reflect. Jeremy knew he had a lot to make up for, but he also knew that this was the moment where everything could change. When he found Christina, he wasn't sure how she would react. He didn't know if she would welcome him with open arms or if she would push him away. But what he did know was that he had to try. He had to show her that she didn't have to carry her burdens alone, that there was someone who cared about her, who saw the strength in her that she couldn't always see in herself. As he stepped into the retreat center, he asked the staff if Christina was there. They nodded and directed him to a small cabin at the edge of the property. When he arrived, he saw her sitting outside, her back turned to him. She was staring out at the mountains, her posture relaxed but distant. He took a deep breath and walked over to her, unsure of what to say. "Christina," he called softly. She turned, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, there was silence between them. And then, Christina stood up slowly, as if unsure of what to do next. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and hesitation. Jeremy swallowed hard. "I came to find you," he said simply. "I came to make sure you know you're not alone." Christina's eyes softened, but she didn't speak. She just stood there, looking at him as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need anyone to save me, Jeremy." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here because I want to be there for you, just like you were there for me." For the first time in what felt like forever, Christina's expression shifted. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that she hadn't allowed anyone to see before. Slowly, she took a step toward him. "I didn't know how to ask for help," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I didn't know if I even deserved it." Jeremy reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "You do," he said softly. "You deserve all the help, love, and support in the world." Christina looked at him, her eyes full of emotion, and in that moment, she knew that she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. And neither did he. Over the next few weeks, Jeremy and Christina continued to spend time together, slowly finding their way back to a friendship that was grounded in mutual understanding. The retreat center had been a turning point for both of them. It had given Christina the space she needed to think, to reflect, and most importantly, to begin healing. For Jeremy, it had been a moment of realization. He had always been focused on the outside world, on what he could build and what he could achieve. But now, he saw that true growth came from within. The work he was doing with local businesses, supporting the community, and living with purpose was all starting to make sense. But it wasn't just the work that had changed his life, it was the people. People like Christina. As they spent more time together, Jeremy began to learn more about Christina's past, her struggles, and the sacrifices she had made. She had always been the one to put others first, to take care of her family, to work tirelessly to make sure everyone else was okay. But in doing so, she had lost sight of her own dreams. She had sacrificed so much to care for others, and for the longest time, She didn't know how to ask for help. Jeremy had seen that for the first time. He had seen the weight she had been carrying all those years, and it broke his heart. But in her own quiet way, Christina had found the strength to ask for help when she needed it most. And that was something that Jeremy admired. He had been so used to being the one in control, the one who never needed help. But now, he understood that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of strength. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch of her childhood home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Christina turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I never thought I'd be here, doing this," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd be able to ask for help, to let people in." Jeremy looked at her, his heart swelling with affection. "You've come a long way, Christina," he said softly. "And I'm proud of you." She smiled, but there was still a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "I don't know if I can ever fully let go of everything I've been carrying," she admitted. "It feels like I've been carrying it for so long." Jeremy reached out and took her hand gently, offering her the comfort and reassurance she needed. "You don't have to carry it all alone anymore," he said. "And you don't have to carry it forever. You've already made so much progress. Just take it one step at a time." The words were simple, but they held so much meaning. Christina had spent so long trying to do everything on her own, thinking she had to be strong for everyone else. But now, she was learning that it was okay to let people in, to ask for help when she needed it. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the weight lifting off her shoulders. As the days passed, Jeremy and Christina continued to support each other. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And that was enough. Jeremy helped Christina take the first steps toward rebuilding her life, encouraging her to start pursuing her passions again, to reconnect with the things that made her feel alive. He helped her realize that it wasn't too late to chase her dreams, to find her own purpose outside of the roles she had always played. Christina slowly began to open up about her past, about her time in finance, about the dreams she had given up, about the fears she had carried. It wasn't easy, but with Jeremy by her side, it became a little bit easier each day. As they worked together, Christina started to find the confidence she had lost so many years ago. She began to rediscover the woman she had always been before the world had weighed her down. And as she did, she realized something important. She didn't have to do it all alone. The support she had given to others over the years was finally coming back to her, and it was okay to accept it. Jeremy, too, found that as he helped Christina, he was helping himself. He was learning to let go of his need to control everything, to be the one always giving. In giving to Christina, he was learning to receive, to accept help and love in return. It was a lesson he had never learned in the corporate world, but one that he was starting to understand. As the weeks turned into months, their bond grew stronger. Jeremy continued to support Christina, not just in her personal journey, but also in her professional one. He helped her start a new business, one that focused on financial literacy and empowering others, especially women, to take control of their finances. It was something she had always been passionate about, and now, with Jeremy's help, she was able to bring it to life. And through it all, Jeremy realized that his true success wasn't measured by the billions he had accumulated or the power he had held. It was measured by the people he had helped, the lives he had touched, and the love he had shared. In helping Christina find her way, he had found his own path. And for the first time in a long time, Jeremy felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the months passed, Jeremy and Christina's partnership grew into something deeper than either of them had expected. The business that Christina had started, focused on financial literacy and empowering others, began to gain traction. She had built it from the ground up with Jeremy's help, but it was her vision, her passion, that fueled its success. It was a reflection of everything she had been through, the struggles, the sacrifices, the lessons learned, and now she was turning it into something that could help others. But even as the business flourished, Jeremy could sense that there was still something Christina wasn't sharing with him. She had opened up about many things, but there was one chapter of her life she hadn't fully revealed. He could see it in the way her eyes would momentarily cloud over when certain topics came up, the way she would change the subject when the past was mentioned. It wasn't that she was hiding anything. He knew she was just trying to protect herself, trying to protect him from the pain she had carried for so long. One evening, as they sat together in the office they had built for her business, Jeremy decided it was time to ask. "Christina, he began, his voice gentle but firm. I know you've been through a lot, and I've seen how strong you are. But there's something I need to know. Something you haven't told me. Christina looked at him, her gaze steady but wary. She knew exactly what he was talking about. It had always been there, lingering just beneath the surface. What are you afraid to tell me? Jeremy's voice softened. She looked away for a moment, her eyes focusing on the wall, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. It's not that I'm afraid, she said quietly. It's just, I don't want to drag you into it. He reached across the table, his hand gently touching hers. Christina, we've been through so much together already. I'm not going anywhere. But I can't help you if I don't know everything. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Her eyes filled with emotion, and for a moment, she didn't speak. She took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to finally say what she had been holding back. When I was in finance, she began slowly. I had a colleague who was more than just a business partner. He was someone I trusted, someone I thought was my friend. She paused, her fingers trembling slightly. But he betrayed me, not just in business. In ways I can't even explain. I lost everything. My career, my reputation, my peace of mind. I was left with nothing. Jeremy's heart sank as he listened. He had known she had a past in finance, but he hadn't known the full extent of what had happened. He had never asked, thinking it was something too painful for her to revisit. But now, hearing her speak about it, he understood the depth of the wounds she had carried for so long. He took everything from me, Jeremy, she continued, her voice breaking. And I couldn't let anyone know. I couldn't let anyone see me as weak, as someone who had been taken advantage of. So I left. I walked away from it all. Jeremy squeezed her hand, his heart aching for her. Christina, you don't have to carry that burden anymore. You're not weak. You've built something amazing from the ground up. You're strong beyond measure. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. But it's not just about what I've built. It's about what I lost. The trust one lost. The pieces of myself I lost along the way. He leaned in, his voice steady. You didn't lose yourself. You're still here. You're still fighting. And that's what matters. Christina wiped her eyes and gave him a small, shaky smile. For the first time, she felt like she could let go of some of the weight she had been carrying. She had feared that Jeremy would see her differently, that he would think less of her for what had happened. But in that moment, she realized that he didn't. He saw her for who she was. Not as a victim, but as someone who had fought and kept going despite the odds. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me. Jeremy smiled, his heart full. I don't give up on people who matter to me. And he meant it. Over the next few weeks, they worked together to make Christina's business even more successful, helping people regain control of their financial futures. But more than that, they continued to rebuild their own future, step by step. As Christina opened up more, Jeremy stood by her, supporting her through the rough patches, the painful memories, and the healing process. She realized that she didn't need to bury her past anymore. She could face it, move forward, and create something better. Jeremy had given her the strength to believe in herself again, to believe that her story wasn't defined by her past mistakes or betrayals, but by her ability to rise above them. In the quiet moments, when they sat together after a long day's work, Christina felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't just healing for herself. She was healing for the future she wanted to create. And with Jeremy by her side, she knew she could face anything. As the weeks turned into months, Christina's life began to transform in ways she had never imagined. With Jeremy's unwavering support, she was able to step fully into the vision she had once kept buried deep inside her. Her business grew steadily, reaching more people who needed her help. What had started as a small endeavor to help others with financial literacy had blossomed into something larger, something that was truly making a difference in the world. The workshop sessions she hosted were filling up, and people were beginning to take notice of the impact she was having. Christina no longer felt like the woman trapped in the shadows of her past. She had found her voice again, and it was powerful. She could speak about money, not just as a concept, but as a tool to empower others. Jeremy, too, had found a new sense of purpose. His days were filled with meetings, not about acquisitions or profits, but about making a tangible difference in people's lives. It was a new kind of success, one that was measured in the impact he had on the world, not just the size of his bank account. The two of them had created something far beyond business. They had created a legacy of change. But as their business grew, so did the challenges. Christina found herself stretched thin, balancing the demands of her growing business with her personal healing process. Though she had made incredible strides, there were still moments when the weight of her past threatened to resurface. She had moments of doubt, moments when the pressure felt too much. On one particularly difficult evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, Christina sat in her office, staring at the computer screen but not really seeing it. The numbers and projections in front of her blurred together. It was then that Jeremy walked in, noticing the exhaustion in her eyes. "Christina, you need to take a break," he said softly, his voice gentle but firm. She looked up at him, her expression tired. "I can't afford to take a break," she replied, her voice laced with frustration. "There's too much to do. People are counting on me." Jeremy sat down beside her, his presence calming. "I know they are. But you can't help anyone if you're running on empty. You need to take care of yourself first." Christina looked at him, the weight of his words settling in. She had always been the one to push herself, to keep going, no matter how much it hurt. But now, she realized, maybe it was time to stop and breathe. "I don't know how to stop," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I've spent so long going. I don't know how to just be." Jeremy smiled softly, understanding her more than she realized. "I know. But you've come so far, Christina. You're not the same person you were when we first met. You've learned that it's okay to ask for help, to lean on others. And it's okay to slow down when you need to." She nodded, a small sense of relief washing over her. Maybe it was time to let herself take a step back, even if just for a moment. As she sat there, taking in Jeremy's words, she realized that everything didn't always have to be perfect. The work would still be there tomorrow. The people who needed her would still be there. But right now, she needed to be there for herself. It was a lesson that took her a long time to learn. And as she took a deep breath and closed her laptop, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. Over the next few days, Christina made a conscious effort to balance her work and personal life. She spent more time in the office with Jeremy, but she also took time for herself. She started doing things she had forgotten she enjoyed, taking long walks in the park, reading books for pleasure, and even cooking meals for herself instead of relying on takeout. Jeremy, too, continued to encourage her to take the time she needed, always reminding her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her own. As the weeks went by, Christina found herself feeling more centered, more grounded. The pressure didn't feel as overwhelming as it once had. She realized that it was okay to take things one day at a time, to focus on the present instead of worrying about what was ahead. Her business was still growing, still changing lives, but she had learned that the real work wasn't just in the business, it was in herself. And she was finally learning to trust that it was enough. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of their shared apartment, looking out over the city that had been the backdrop to their journey, Jeremy turned to Christina, his eyes filled with pride. "You've done something incredible, Christina. I'm proud of you." She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the same pride. "We've done something incredible," she corrected, her voice filled with warmth. "I couldn't have done it without you." Jeremy reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "And I couldn't have done it without you." They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the city fading into the background. In that moment, they both knew that they had built something far greater than just a successful business. They had built a life rooted in love, in trust, and in the belief that no matter how far they had come, they could always keep growing, together. Months had passed since that quiet evening on the balcony, and Christina found herself in a place she never thought possible, both at peace with herself and excited about the future. She had continued her work with the financial literacy business, seeing more and more people reach out, eager to learn. Her name, once tied to pain and sacrifice, was now associated with empowerment, with hope. Jeremy was by her side every step of the way, and together they had built something truly remarkable. Their partnership was stronger than ever, not just in business, but in life. They had become a team in the truest sense, supporting each other in ways that went beyond professional boundaries. As the business continued to grow, they found themselves balancing the demands of success with their commitment to each other. They were living their lives, not for the accolades or the financial success, but for the difference they were making. Christina had begun to mentor other women who were looking to break free from financial struggles, just as she once had. She had seen firsthand how it felt to be trapped by circumstances, and now, with Jeremy's unwavering support, she was doing everything she could to help others rise above it. But with all the success and all the changes, there were still moments of doubt. One morning, as she sat in her office reviewing documents for a new partnership opportunity, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. She looked different, stronger, more confident, but she also felt an undercurrent of uncertainty. Was she really doing enough? Was this the life she had dreamed of? The question lingered in her mind as the hours passed. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was still holding on to something. It was then that Jeremy knocked on the door, entering with his usual calm presence. He noticed the furrow in her brow immediately. "What's going on?" he asked, setting down a cup of coffee on her desk. Christina took a deep breath, running her fingers through her hair. "I don't know," she admitted. I'm just thinking about everything. It feels like we've built something amazing, but there are days when I wonder if I'm really doing what I'm meant to do." Jeremy walked over to her and sat down, his expression softening. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. "I mean, I've come so far from where I was. But there are still days when I feel like I'm carrying the weight of everything. The business, my past, the people who depend on me. And some days I'm not sure if I can keep going," she said, her voice heavy with the vulnerability she had been holding back. Jeremy took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "Christina, you've done so much already. You've helped so many people. You've built something that didn't exist before, something that has the power to change lives." Christina shook her head, her eyes downcast. "But is it enough?" she asked. Jeremy smiled softly, leaning in. "It's enough, Christina. You are enough. You've been more than enough to the people who need you, and to me. Don't let the weight of the world make you forget that." His words, as simple as they were, hit her in a way she didn't expect. She had spent so long focusing on what was still left to do that she hadn't taken the time to reflect on how far she had come. Her heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and release. She had allowed herself to get caught up in the pressure of success, but in that moment, she realized that it wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about always doing more. It was about doing her best, and that was enough. The pressure had eased, just a little, but it was enough for her to breathe again. "Thank you, Jeremy," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I needed to hear that." He smiled, his eyes warm. "Anytime, Christina. You don't have to do this alone. Not now, not ever." As the day went on, Christina felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to have everything figured out. She could take things one day at a time. She could embrace the journey and trust that the path she was on was the right one for her. She was no longer afraid of the uncertainty. With Jeremy by her side and the business growing stronger, she realized that the most important thing wasn't perfection, it was progress. It was the willingness to keep going, even on the hard days, and to know that she was making a difference. Christina knew now that the only thing that truly mattered was the impact she was having on others, the way she was able to help people change their lives, just as her own had changed. The future was uncertain, but she felt ready to face it. She was no longer defined by her past, but by the woman she had become. The woman who had fought through the hardest moments of her life and had come out on the other side stronger, more resilient, and more determined to make a difference. With a renewed sense of purpose, Christina looked ahead with hope. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the months continued to pass, Christina's confidence in her journey only grew. Her business had reached new heights, expanding beyond what she had ever imagined. More women were finding empowerment through her financial literacy programs, and the ripple effects were becoming more evident in the communities she was helping. But despite the success, she knew the work was far from over. She felt a deep sense of responsibility for the people who were relying on her, and there were days when the weight of that responsibility felt heavy. Yet, something inside her had shifted. She had begun to embrace the uncertainty of life with a quiet resolve. With Jeremy's support, she had learned to take it one day at a time, and she was no longer afraid to rest when she needed to. She had found a new rhythm, one that balanced work, self-care, and growth. However, there were still moments that would pull her back into the doubts of her past. One morning, as she walked into her office, Christina was greeted by a message from one of her mentors. It was an invitation to speak at a major financial conference. This was the kind of opportunity she had always dreamed of, the kind of platform where she could truly make an impact. But as she read the invitation, she felt a familiar pang of doubt. What if she wasn't ready? What if people saw through her, saw that she was just someone who had learned as she went, someone who wasn't an expert in the traditional sense? She had spent so many years feeling like an imposter in the finance world, and now, even after all her growth, the old insecurities crept back in. Jeremy walked into the office just as she was lost in her thoughts. He noticed the tension on her face immediately. "What's going on?" he asked gently. Christina looked up at him, her expression torn. "I've been invited to speak at this huge financial conference," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's a big deal, but I don't know if I'm ready. What if they find out that I'm just winging it?" Jeremy smiled and walked over to her desk, sitting down beside her. "Christina, look at how far you've come. You didn't get here by accident. You've built something incredible, something that has helped so many people." She looked at him, still unsure. "But what if they ask me something I don't know? What if I'm exposed as a fraud?" He chuckled softly. "I've seen you speak to crowds before. You've got more knowledge than you give yourself credit for. You've lived through everything you teach. That's what makes you the expert." Christina felt her chest tighten. "But what if I mess up?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Then you mess up," Jeremy replied, his voice firm but kind. "But that doesn't change how far you've come or the impact you've had. It doesn't make you any less qualified." Christina looked at him, her mind racing. She had spent so much time trying to be perfect, trying to meet every expectation. But in that moment, she realized that maybe it wasn't about being perfect at all. Maybe it was about being authentic, about embracing who she was, flaws and all. "You're right," she said quietly, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. "I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be me." Jeremy smiled, his pride for her evident in his eyes. Exactly. The decision was made. Christina would go to the conference. She would speak her truth, and whatever happened, she would know that it was enough. The day of the conference arrived, and as Christina stood backstage, waiting for her turn to speak, she felt a familiar wave of nerves. The crowd was large, and the stakes felt high. But as she stepped onto the stage, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply going to share her story, to share what she had learned, and to help others find the same sense of empowerment that she had found. She spoke with honesty, with passion, and with the knowledge that came not just from books, but from living through the very struggles she now helped others navigate. As she spoke, she felt the audience connect with her, and the nerves began to fade. She wasn't just a speaker at that moment. She was a person, just like everyone else, sharing her journey. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. Christina stood there, overwhelmed with emotion. She had done it. She had spoken her truth, and in doing so, she had not only helped others, but had also helped herself. She had broken free from the chains of self-doubt that had held her back for so long. As she stepped off the stage, Jeremy was waiting for her, a proud smile on his face. "You were amazing," he said, wrapping her in a warm hug. She laughed softly, feeling a wave of relief. "I did it," she whispered. "You did," Jeremy replied. "And you did it as yourself. That's all that matters." In that moment, Christina knew that this was just the beginning. There would always be more challenges, more opportunities, and more moments of doubt. But she had learned that she could face them all, not as someone trying to be perfect, but as someone who was true to herself. And that, she realized, was the greatest success of all. The months that followed the conference were some of the most transformative for Christina and Jeremy. They had both changed in ways that were far beyond what they had imagined when they first crossed paths. Christina continued to build her business, now with more confidence and clarity than ever before. She had found a balance between her personal and professional life, one that allowed her to grow without feeling like she was constantly running on empty. The work she had done to heal, to forgive herself, and to embrace her journey had made all the difference. Her clients were thriving, and her influence was growing. But more than that, Christina had finally found the peace she had been searching for her whole life. It wasn't about the accolades or the recognition. It was about knowing that she was living her truth, and that her story was resonating with others. Jeremy, too, had learned valuable lessons throughout their time together. He had seen firsthand the strength it took to rebuild after everything had fallen apart. It wasn't just about building wealth. It was about building a life that had meaning, that truly made a difference. He had shifted his focus from acquiring more to giving more, and it was in that shift that he found his true purpose. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their shared apartment, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Christina turned to Jeremy with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I never imagined I would be here, living this life. I thought I'd always be chasing something that was never quite within reach. But now, I realized that everything I needed was already inside of me." Jeremy smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad you see that," he replied, his voice filled with warmth. "You've always had everything you needed. Sometimes, it just takes a little while to figure that out." They sat together in silence, the weight of the past finally feeling like it had been lifted, replaced with the promise of the future. As Christina looked out over the city, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey she had taken. It had been long and difficult, but it had brought her to this place. She had found herself in ways she never thought possible, and she knew that the best was yet to come. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt, but Christina had learned that she didn't have to face them alone. With Jeremy by her side, there was nothing she couldn't overcome. As the sun set and the stars began to shine, Christina leaned her head on Jeremy's shoulder, knowing that they had built something real, something that would last. She was no longer the person she had been when they first met. She was stronger, wiser, and more at peace than she had ever been. And most importantly, she was finally living a life that was true to herself. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress, about growing, and about embracing who she had become. And with Jeremy by her side, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The journey was far from over, but Christina was ready for whatever came next, because she had found her purpose, her voice, and her strength. And with that, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. If you are looking for heartwarming and transformative touching stories, this is the journey you won't want to miss. Follow the inspiring tale of Christina and Jeremy, two individuals who find healing, purpose, and strength through life's challenges. From moments of doubt to overcoming personal struggles, their touching stories demonstrate the power of resilience and self-discovery. Christina's story shows how, even in the face of overwhelming odds, it is possible to rebuild, find peace, and empower others. Jeremy, too, learns the true meaning of success, not measured by wealth, but by the positive impact we make in the lives of others. Together, they learn that the most powerful transformations come from within. These touching stories remind us all that, no matter how difficult the road may seem, there is always a way forward if we embrace who we truly are. With heartfelt moments and lessons learned through adversity, these touching stories will leave you inspired and filled with hope for the future. Join Christina and Jeremy on their journey and experience how these touching stories are changing lives, one step at a time.